Well, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Mars in the 7th house video. This video has been a long time coming. I know that I've kept you all waiting. So, I see there are a few people here in the chats. La La Land 099, good evening. Rohini Ray, good evening. Shebel X, good evening. Z Dinerwowani Corgi, good evening. I'll just call you Corgi. J1, J1, J1. Good evening to you. All right, listen, let's get into it. Mars in the 7th. Now, unfortunately, I did not refine this document. I have not edited everything perfectly yet, so I'm just going to be editing everything as I am live. Mars is a malefic, so in general, it reduces the significations of wherever it sits. Unlike Saturn, which simply does not allow for the development of the placement, Mars cuts one away from it, diminishes it, or actively reduces it. One common signification of Mars in the 7th is, of course, disinterest in marriage and long-term contracts. Or something always happens that forces the individual to separate themselves from their spouse. Whether well placed or badly placed, it is often a disinterest in being too close to the other, or even to others, if it compromises one's individuality. It can mean that the partner is competitive, the partner would compare themselves to one, and the partner would try to overwhelm one. That is one thing about Mars. Mars is, as the Karaka of the 3rd house, the 3rd house has a lot to do with comparisons. The 3rd house is the house of one's siblings, one's co-workers, one's classmates, and it has a lot to do with wanting to stand out among them, right? And so Mars has this energy to it that it's always comparing itself to other people. It can produce a sexually competitive person in that, though the individual may not be too interested in romance, they are invested in their own sexual market value. We're seeing some of that editing that I was talking about. The 7th house is the main house of attraction and seducing others. Mars being a malefic would generally suggest someone who is not interested in self-beautification, is not interested in having multiple partners, and actually Mars here could easily make someone celibate because it is minimizing the 7th house and its significations. Mars in the 7th could make someone choose virginity or celibacy for many years. This if it is well placed, but when Mars is badly placed, it struggles to defend the 7th house from suitors and from its own lusts. When well placed, Mars here would stop someone even from watching pornography or masturbating because it defeats lust. But this can be bad for marriage because it suggests that an individual struggles to allow themselves to be sexually open and available to their partner, either because they have a reduced sex drive or because they have personal issues against what? You see, another editing problem. Or they have personal issues against sex. Of course, this resistance to sex can make connection difficult, which can result in divorce. When badly placed, Mars becomes very prideful, and so it desires to be attractive. So we were just seeing one expression where it can make a person disinterested in attraction altogether and more interested in celibacy. But now we're seeing a different expression where, depending on how it's placed, it can actually create the opposite expression. It can make somebody who is very involved with self-beautification and wants to be very attractive to many people because it sees conquering many lovers as a source of pride. You know, Mars, wherever it sits, also wishes to gain status and gain prominence through those placements. And so Mars in the 7th can either create the celibate or it can create the player. You know, somebody who's out here playing the field, whether a man or a woman. You know, collecting as many lovers and making themselves feel good about themselves and impressive because of how many lovers they're collecting. All right, so now we're reading about that expression. When badly placed, Mars becomes very prideful, and so it desires to be attractive and to accumulate partners as a show of one's power, prowess, and intelligence. So it will behave in a vain way, decorating itself, perfuming itself, working out, and wanting to attract others, but not truly because one wishes to connect with them deeply and emotionally. Instead, one collects sexual and romantic partners like trophies. In fact, it can even be accused of slutty behavior, dressing in ways and acting in ways that quickly call towards its new partners. Because of this very sexually loose energy, one can once again see opportunities for divorce, because this individual can easily cheat on one's partners. So, whether virginal or slutty, let me even. All right. So, whether virginal or slutty, Mars in the 7th can destroy, quote unquote, the significations of marriage and contracts, making long term romantic relationships very difficult. The 7th house is a house of attachments. Naturally, it relates to all the things that create bonds and ties between people. And so, Mars here destroys attachments and anything that creates romantic attachments. Lust is one of the main emotions or sins of the 7th house, as one of its names is literally smata, meaning erotic desire. Mars is the main planet that destroys our enemies, meaning both external and internal, in the way of sin. When it is strong, it manages to destroy our sins, making one virginal in the 7th. If weak, it struggles to destroy these sins, making one promiscuous. All right, let's check the chat. Very slow evening this evening. 17 concurrent views, 34 views total. Partners are obsessed with these people. That can be an expression of it as well. What are or is Mangala Dosh? It's basically those combinations of Mars that destroy marriage. Thank you. No, I am not American. I am far from it. Far from it. All right, then. Let us go back. Let us go back. There's something that I also wanted to write over here about it destroying attachments. So one thing that can happen to many lovers and many people who are strongly 7th house based is that they can start to resemble their partners over time because they do the same things, they eat the same foods, they spend a lot of time together, you know what I mean? But when you have Mars in the 7th house, you are less inclined to wanting to do the same hobbies as your partner. You know, you could be the sort of you could have the sort of relationship where each person has their own separate lives, you know what I mean? Let me write that down here. Or type it. Whereas normally those who are strongly 7th house base would wish to spend a lot of time with their partners, doing the same activities, traveling together, eating the same foods, etc., which would slowly make them resemble one another. A Mars in the 7th house severs these bonding activities, forcing each partner to live his or her separate lives. Something else about Mars in the 7th house is that it can make people want to have their own separate bedrooms. Mars in the 7th house could also make partners wish to have their own separate bedrooms. Something else that Mars in the 7th house could do is that because it's trying to cut all those binding qualities of the 7th house, it could also lead to an open relationship. Mars here could also lead to an open relationship because of how much it destroys everything, all of the binding significations of the 7th house. All right. Ooh, house. So now continuing. They are often very sexually exciting and are relatively charismatic because one can sense sexual energy just oozing off of these people, particularly when it's badly placed. In fact, it is as if sexual energy is leaking out of them, which is why those with Mars badly placed in the 7 can be accused of being F boys or slutty, even when they seem to be dressing normally or behaving normally. Let me ask you guys, haven't you guys ever met those people who they're just something about them, something about the way that they walk, something just like their aura is just like I don't even know how to describe it. Their aura is just very sexual, not even sexy per se, but just sexual. There's a particular aura that makes you feel like this person's out here having a lot of fun, if you understand what I mean. Continuing. People feel threatened by them because they look like the sort of people who can easily steal your partner. And at their worst, they may even go after other people's partners because their sexual energy can seem so loose, pouring everywhere. It is easy for them to inspire these sort of thoughts. But because the 7th house is one of the darkest houses, because it's the death of the sun, it also allows for criminal activity or activities performed when no one is looking. And so, for this reason, Mars badly placed here can indeed also create those who are unfaithful to their partners. But more broadly, it can create thieves, scammers, and deceivers because Mars itself is a planet related to thieves, and the 7th house is also specifically related to thieves. Where Mars sits, it turns those significations into its tools and weapons. And sitting in the house of other people, it is interested in learning the arts of charm and persuasion to get others to submit to it and become its soldiers. All right, let's take a break. Let's check the chat. D9, 7 to Venus, K2 Mars, Aries, Ascendant Sun, Jupiter, Ra. Okay. I don't really see this pickiness signification in the 7th. If you're talking about your chart, it's most likely something else. It can just make one resistant to long-term partnerships in general. Yes, this life will definitely be saved. Which ones of my lives are not saved? They're all saved. I'm so sorry to hear that about your friend Mooncloud. Alright, let us check the chat. This might end up breaking the record for the shortest live yet. We shall see. But it'll also depend if you guys have any questions to ask or anything like that. When Mars is better placed, it can behave dustly. Because Mars is a planet of pride, and also because it relates to the tools and strategies we employ to compete with others and subdue the material plane, Mars here creates a desire for a socially impressive partner. It is not enough that the native is attracted to their partner, but everyone else must also find them attractive. It is not enough that the native finds their partner to be intelligent or great in some way. Everyone else must also find them admirable, because Mars in the 7th house uses his or her partner as a tool to compete and to stand out. But as one can see, one way or the other, the individual can end up objectifying their partner because they can reduce them literally to objects or tools needed to accomplish things. Whether it is collecting many partners to show off to their friends, strategically targeting a specific partner because he looks good on paper, or even just using people to gratify oneself sexually and then discard them. Mars being a malefic is also related to destroying our weaknesses, and the way that Mars at the 7th may do this is by playfully competing with the spouse like a sibling. You see your partner working out and you suddenly feel the urge to work out in order to outdo them, for example. On the negative side, there may be jealousy, and you may not wish for your partner to outdo you. So this is very interesting, isn't it? On the one hand, your partner might refine you in the sense that you see them succeeding, so you're like, okay, I'm going to succeed too. You're my inspiration. You're my inspiration. But on the other hand, you can develop such a jealousy of your partner. Your partner can threaten you so much that you might secretly start sabotaging them. Or, depending on how Mars is placed on your chart, it is your partner that sabotages you. And so Mars in the 7th, well, listen, it takes a little managing. It takes a little managing. If it is a functional benefic, it can be better. But if it is a functional malefic and it is badly placed in the sevens, then yeah. No bueno. No bueno indeed. At its best, Mars here creates a partner that is your best friend, your ride or die, because he or she will always have your back, will always defend you, will always sacrifice for you. The relationship may either be open or sexless, and indeed turn into one of friendship. On the negative, one's partner could be one's worst competitor or opponents. One is always comparing oneself to them. They cause one a lot of jealousy, like I said, and one may overall view the success of the partner as some sort of threat to one's person. On the positive, once again, one sees one's partner as one's team member, and so the partner's success is one's own success. Yes, this can be read from the moon sign. What placements do I think is most compatible with Mars? First and foremost, good luck. It's already difficult enough finding a good partner, you know? So first you have to find somebody that you like, and then you're going to check their chart to see if they have Mars in 7 or not, and then you're going to reject them on the basis of that. It doesn't seem like the best strategy. Because, I mean, if you automatically have Mars in the 7s, you're already going to attract that sort of partner. You know what I mean? The only real thing that you can do is find a way of healing yourself. So the version of Mars in the 7 that you do attract is one that is good for you. You know what I mean? I think that's the best strategy. So what placement would I say is most compatible with Mars in the 7s? The sort of placements that somebody with Mars in the 7 would attract are the basics. Somebody who has Mars nakshatras, somebody who has Mars signs, somebody who has a lot of 3rd house or 6th house placements, those sort of things. Yes, again, it can be read from the moon. MAGA video when? The Pusha video was barely released. I take like a couple of months between these nakshatra videos, so it's not going to be too soon. Both Mars in the 7 and Ketu in the 7 have a lot of themes of separation. The only difference is that Ketu in the 7, because Ketu is a planet of abundance. Ketu is even more abundance than Jupiter, because Ketu relates a lot to the gifts of the past lives. So if you're someone who has Ketu in the 7th house, what that suggests is that you very, very, very easily attract a lot of partners. And depending on how Ketu is placed, you attract powerful partners, very attractive partners. You know, you're the type of person that you dump this guy, the next person you date, and then you quickly date somebody new. You see what I mean? That's the kind of person that you become. And Mars in the 7 causes separation in a different way that Ketu in the 7 does. Remember that Ketu suggests our unconscious behavior. Ketu also suggests our the sort of talents and powers and gifts that we have that we are either ignorant of or we don't take seriously. We don't really acknowledge, you know. For example, to go on a little bit of a tangent here, people all your life could remark that you're a very intelligent person. They could go to you, oh, Corgi, you're so smart, Corgi, you're so smart. But it's like you hear it all the time that you just, it gets to the point you think people are just being nice. You don't even take them seriously, you know? When in reality, Corgi, you might actually be extremely intelligent, but that's a talent of yours that you're just so ignorant of because it's so much a fact of your existence that you're literally ignorant of it, you know? And so that's the whole process of, as they say, integrating your Ketu, right? Which is essentially becoming more aware of yourself. So let's just do this thing really quick. Ketu is the planet of unconscious behavior. Do you know what planet heals Ketu? What planet mantra heals Ketu? Rahu, because Rahu is a planet of conscious awareness. And so to really break it down in very, very practical terms, what astrologers really mean when they say integrate your Ketu, integrate your Rahu, they mean become aware of the things that you're not aware of. Become aware of the talents that you have that you ignore. Become aware of the gifts that you have that you ignore. The things that are so powerful about you, but that you have a lot of contempt for. Even when you study the iconography of goddess Dhumavati, which is the goddess that refines Ketu, what you find is that she's surrounded by so much gold, and yet she sees herself as poor. But when you worship Dhumavati, you become aware of the gold in your life, and you can better utilize it. So yeah, Ketu in the 7 can cause separation in the sense that you start to neglect your partner, things like that. You have a lot of wealth in the 7th house, but you have a lot of contempt for the natural wealth that you possess in that house, essentially. So yeah. Mars and Saturn are also enemies, So unfortunately, a lot of times when you have inimical placements in a birth chart, what you will find is violence. Let me open up a thing here. So for example, let us look at Muhammad Ali's chart. Muhammad Ali, let's look at AstroSeek. So I'm sure some of you guys know who Muhammad Ali is or was. He was a boxer, he was a fighter, right? One of the most famous boxers. But now if I were to ask you, looking at Muhammad Ali's chart, what in his chart suggests that he was a fighter? Did he have 6th house placements? No. 3rd house placements? No. Did he have Mars in the 1st house? No. Sure, he has Mars in the 10, but Mars in the 10 could suggest many, many different things. When you look at his chart, there's not much that obviously suggests that he is a violent person, but then check this out. His first lord, the moon, is conjunct 2 enemies, actually. But specifically, it is conjunct Mercury, but it's conjunct 2 enemies. What made Muhammad Ali a fighter? What gave him an aggressive temperament was the fact that his moon was conjunct Mercury. And Mercury hates the moon. And so this interaction, these 2 planets are constantly battling each other. And then on top of that, Venus is also conjunct moon. So all 3 of these planets are battling one another. And so it creates a fighter's temperament. Let us check Amber Heard's chart. And also something else that you will find is that in the charts of many people who unfortunately have suffered or supposedly have suffered or have inflicted domestic abuse, you will also find those sort of conjunctions. Unfortunately, Amber Heard does not have her birth time available. What was it about Amber Heard's chart? She does have moon opposite Mercury, but there was something else about her chart. There's something else that I don't remember. But in any case, there's that. Yeah. What are good remedies for 7th house Mars? It's easier to see this within the context of a chart, but in general, what is said, the goddess that is said to heal Mars is, of course, goddess Bagala Mukhi. But if you're somebody who feels weary about chanting mantras and doing all this more, I suppose you could say, heavy spiritual stuff, very effective, but perhaps a little bit on the heavier side. Although very effective. If you have a badly placed Mars, what it suggests is that you have a difficult time really properly expressing your energy. One thing that I personally would recommend is dancing, because goddess Bagalamukhi also has a lot of influence in dancing. But I will talk more about that in the Bagalamukhi video. Of course, yes, Mars in the 7 can cause a lot of facial issues, definitely. And scars are, of course, one of the basic significations of Mars. How do we know if the Mars is in the 7 is benefic or malefic? That's also quite easy. Uh, functional benefic versus functional malefic. So, as a general rule, the friends of Mars, whenever they're ruling the ascendant, Mars is a functional benefic. So, if you have an Aries ascendant, Mars is a functional benefic. If you have a Cancer ascendant, a Leo ascendant, a Virgo, Libra, Scorpio ascendant, Sagittarius ascendants, Pisces ascendant. How many ascendants are these? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If these are your ascendants, Mars is going to be a functional benefic generally. And it's especially going to be a functional benefic for, I can't think right now, but in any case. And then it becomes a functional malefic for all the other ascendants. But it becomes worse depending on the ascendant that you have. Like, for example, if you are of a Gemini ascendant, Mars rules the 11th house. That's pretty bad. And if you are a Capricorn ascendant as well, those are the worst ones for Mars. Your Mars is well placed in Barney, but it might cause you some issues in the 7th house. Mars Ketu conjunction, well, listen. Everything is good or bad depending on how you use it. Okay, let me finish up this document before we continue. The 7th is the most social house and naturally also relates to popularity. Mars is the aspect of the consciousness that relates to defense, attack, and survival. And in the 7th, it perceives being socially successful as a necessary aspect of its survival. So Mars here would be very concerned with associating itself with the right people, carefully masking anything about itself that is not cool. It would train itself into being more charismatic, even going as far as watching videos about how to be funny, how to be charismatic, how to be interesting. It would wish to make a literal science out of being charismatic. All right, so Mars is a planet that has a lot to do with achievements. It has a lot to do with achievements. It has a lot to do with survival. It has a lot to do with trying to make something into a tool that it can use to defend itself and attack itself. So when Mars finds itself in a very social house in the 7th, it's like, how can I use these significations to protect myself? How can I use these significations to appear strong? Then it goes, I know, I'll be popular. Let me learn how to be charismatic and let charisma be my defense. Let me learn how to be social and let being social be my defense. Let me be popular and let that be my etc. So, yes. The houses of death are also considered houses of travel. And so Mars in the 7th can make someone a frequent traveler, someone who may not stay home very long or stay in one place very long, which naturally is one of the things that makes stable long-term relationships difficult. You are likely someone who enjoys short-term contracts, but in business and in romance. On the most negative side, one could exercise a great deal of control over one's spouse, or it could be the other way around. One would study one's spouse to find their vulnerabilities and various other ways of manipulating them and subtly or quite overtly controlling them, maneuvering them, and making them one's pets. On the other hand, depending on how Mars is placed, one's partner could indeed be one's soldier. One is oneself the leader, the authority, and one's partner follows one's lead. But depending on conditions, it could be the other way around. All right, then, let's check the chat. Saturn in the 7th, you have to watch that video. I did a live stream about that. According to what one reads, Mars's light shines 100% upon the first house. So it would add more independence. Once again, a disinterest in marriage. Okay. Ooh, too many planets. Yes, because Rahu is a planet of scarcity, whereas Ketu represents abundance that you're ignorant of. Rahu represents a scarcity that you're extremely aware of. So, unfortunately, wherever it is that you have Rahu, you have a lack of wealth there, an extreme lack of wealth, an extreme wealth, lack of knowledge, and lack of ability in that area that pains you, that embarrasses you. So, yeah, that can be quite difficult. Thank you, Nancy. Do they? Do hostile women often experience DV? If they do, then that's very unfortunate. Yes, Mars in the seven, a lot of social climbing qualities. Sharon. Malefics are natural malefics are generally said to do well in the 11th house. The 11th house in Vedic astrology is considered the most evil house because it is a Trisha Daya house. Trisha Daya houses are considered the most evil houses. And so having a natural malefic that reduces those significations is generally seen as a good thing. They do apply to a slightly lesser degree, but they definitely apply. BB. What in a chart determines the spouse or the native themselves being adventurous? Uh, Bro, there are so many things that could suggest that. The houses of travel, the 12th house, the second house, the seventh house, the eighth house. As a general rule, the houses of travel are also the houses of death. Um, Strong second house placement suggests somebody who wishes to experience a lot of things, see a lot of things, hear a lot of things, taste a lot of things, and so for that they must travel. The seventh house is also said to be travel. The eighth house is traveling by water. Travel by water. The 12th house is a house of other places. And so if you have placements in these houses, it could suggest somebody who travels a lot. But generally speaking, if you have a lot of fifth house placements, it also suggests an extremely adventurous and fun-loving person. It's not travel per se, but it's being very adventurous and very fun-loving. So yes, yes, yes. The third house is not really travel. It is short distance, going to places short distance. The ninth house is said to be a yearning for travel. This is very interesting. I've often read that it is a yearning for travel, which is very different than actual travel. I do not research much on Atmakaraka. I have not given myself really the time to research a lot about Atmakaraka. It's so interesting. In various live streams, people ask me about Atmakarakas. I don't know much about them. I don't understand much about them. There are other astrological concepts that I'm always trying to study more, hone in more, understand more. I've never given myself really the time to study Atmakarakas. So it's very hard for me to say. But we can try to theorize. It is said of the Atmakaraka, of the Chara Atmakaraka, because of course the natural Atmakaraka is the sun, but then there's the Chara Atmakaraka, the Gemini Karakas, which is whatever planet has the highest degree, except if it's Rahu, because Rahu only if it's the lowest degree. The Chara Atmakaraka is the significator of the first house. It is the significator of the body. And so it has a lot to do with one's physical appearance. It has a lot to do with one's aura, one's charm. And since Rahu is a planet of scarcity, a lack of ability, and just a lack of that energy, having Rahu conjunct your Atmakaraka, we're just theorizing here because, again, I have no basis of research or anything like that. Rahu conjunct your Chara Atmakaraka could suggest someone who is ignorant of themselves, does not have a lot of self-knowledge, not very developed body, not a lot of charisma, and just the general significations of the first house. Not a powerful outer identity. Struggles to be himself or understand himself. Not a lot of muscle. Various health issues. I'm so sorry for writing a lot of negative things, you know. So very sorry. If you give me some time, I'm sure I can think of some more positive things to write. This is just like off the bat. So yeah. Mars in the sixth is very good at collecting friends, ride or dies. Mars is the natural karaka of the sixth, and so it's very good at collecting ride or dies. But in terms of charisma, it is less interested in doing that. Mars in the seventh is interested in being popular in general, whereas Mars in the sixth is interested in finding their tribe, finding their clan, you know, that group of friends that's going to defend them no matter what. That's what Mars in the sixth is more interested in. Which goddess my next live stream will be about, I'm not sure, but it's either going to be about Goddess Kamala or Goddess Bagalamukhi. Between these two, I haven't decided. I'm actually developing the document for both of them. So which one I finish first, basically. Are you talking about Woliline? Are you talking about when I said the Mars in the 11th thing? Yeah, generally speaking, you want quote unquote bad planets. There's no such thing as a bad planet. You want quote unquote bad planets in bad houses so that they can negate one another's negativity. Like you're saying here, poison meeting poison. Yeah, Mars in the 7 can deal with polygamy as well. Word. Mars and Saturn are enemies, and so Mars in Aquarius, unfortunately, is quite a bad placement. But it depends. If it is in a chart where Mars is a functional benefic, then the damage is less. But if it is in a chart where Mars is a functional malefic, then that Mars is causing you a lot of pain and a lot of harm. It could suggest that you're somebody who is easily embarrassed. It could suggest that you're somebody who struggles to control her own emotions. It could suggest that you're somebody who's perceived as socially vulnerable. It could suggest that people are constantly putting you down. They're comparing themselves to you to make themselves feel better. Unfortunately. You're welcome, Shebel. Shebel. But yeah, like I said, I really do not know much about it, Makarakas. Shout out, Makarakas. The 12th. The 12th is the ultimate house of foreign places. No, that's not true. Your life has already started with or without your partner. Having First Lord in the seventh house just generally suggests that you're a very social person, but it can also suggest that you have a lot of influence over your partner. Depending on the planet, it can suggest that you have a lot of control over your partner. You exercise a lot of control over them because you are sitting on top of them. Your First Lord is sitting on top of your seventh, and so it does also apply to the D9 as well. All right. I was afraid that this would be a very, very short live. We're at 41 minutes. I think this is a good cutting off point, unless somebody has something to say. Unless anybody has something to say, we could end it here. Yeah, and in my Bagalamukhi live, I'm going to be talking a lot about the Nishta as well. since the energy of Bagalamukhi is that which perfects Mars, right? And so I'm going to be talking a lot about the Nishta, which is the perfection of Mars, but I'm also going to be talking a little bit about Uttara Bhadra, which represents Saturn and Saturnian energy. First Lord in the seven adds a lot to a person's charisma, yes. A person's interested in becoming more charismatic, more charming, more socially charming, more extroverted, more curious about others, more socially playful. Yes, if she's a Leo ascendant, the negatives will not affect her as much. Oh, every Rahu Ketu axis is difficult. Every Rahu and Ketu axis is difficult. I don't know which one is better and which one is worse. It really just depends on what it is that you want in life, but each one of them is difficult in their own way. Each one is difficult in their own way. But in the Kamala Live, I'm going to be talking a lot about Pushya. Because since Kamala is the lotus goddess, Pushya is the lotus nakshatra. Even though Anuradha and Uttara Bhadra also have a relationship to lotuses, Pushya is often seen specifically as the lotus nakshatra. Parivartana yoga, that's the exchange yoga. So, um, if you have, I don't even know what to say. If you have Mars in Sagittarius, and you also have Jupiter in Scorpio, that's a Parivartan yoga because they're exchanging. If you have Mars in the seventh, what it suggests is that you have a lot of partners, but your contracts with those partners do not last. They're often broken, and they're in many ways satisfactory. If you have Saturn in the seventh house, it could suggest that you have struggled to have partners. Okay, so Saturn, when it's sitting in a place, it can make it difficult for that thing to develop. It can literally make it difficult for that thing to develop. When Mars is sitting in that place, it can make things fructify very, very quickly. Um, it can make things fructify very, very quickly. But like in the case of the seventh house, you're constantly destroying those things and finding new things. So the one does not let you develop, and the other makes things develop very, very quickly. But you're constantly, ripping them out of the ground, so to speak. Depending on how the Parivartan goes, yes, but it can also suggest that your partner is your ride or die because the success is the house of ride or dies. But unfortunately, it can also suggest that your relationship is a point of weakness because the sixth lord, the sixth house is the house of our weaknesses. If we fix our weaknesses, they're no longer as weak, but it's specifically the house of our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities, our Achilles heel. And that is why we are attacked by our enemies, because as a general rule, your enemies are going to attack you at a point of weakness. As a general rule, anytime you have weak planets in your birth chart, that is where you have a lot of enemies. So, weak planets, lots of enemies. Strong planets, no enemies. So, weakness always invites enemies, whether it's internal enemies in the form of disease, whether it's spiritual enemies, or whether it's material enemies. Weak planets, lots of enemies. And since the sixth house is specifically the house of vulnerabilities, it can suggest that your relationship is a point of vulnerability somehow. Your partner may carry moral vulnerabilities, health vulnerabilities. It will really just depend. Saturn would have to work at a thing like a science. It would have to experiment a lot. Yes, definitely. Exactly, like learn to flirt and learn to seduce to become better. I talk about this in the Saturn Live, Saturn the Seventh House Live. I have not spoken about Venus conjunct Mars because Mars is a malefic and malefics reduce. It can suggest that a person does not have a lot of it. There are a couple of things that are similar to Mars in the seventh. You have many romantic relationships because Mars forces the fructification of things, but those relationships do not last as long, unfortunately. Moon in six is not necessarily fucked if it is well placed because what it suggests is that you have a lot of people defending you. You are part of a trustworthy community. You know what I mean? But it can also, on the negative side, it can suggest that you're somebody who is easily emotionally manipulated because your moon is your vulnerability, right? But again, it depends how placed it is. Your sixth house may be empty, but where is its lord? Where is its lord? All right, guys, 47 minutes. I think that's a good run. Thank you guys so much for participating. Thank you guys so much for making this a nice and smooth stream. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Would Mars in the 7 mean cheating? Yes, unfortunately, if it is badly placed especially, it can also suggest cheating. But there are various things that could easily counteract that. You know? All right then. And so, goodbye. And thank you guys so much for participating. Depending on the Purana, Mars was either born in Shadabisha or Purva Ashada, so you can reflect upon both of those things.